Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Arnis Luks here at the Crossroads, and I'd like to welcome my guests from Canada. Welcome, Robert Klinck.
Hello, Arnie. Good to be with you again.
No worries. How's the weather, Robert?
Cold. This winter will never end.
Okay.
Minus 17 tonight, I think. It's
Mm.
for another 3 or 4 nights. It's going to be like that.
Oh well.
It's lasting longer than it should.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we're officially ended our summer, and it was a very mild summer. And at
Hmm.
night we've got the doona on, and we were actually thinking about the heater the other night. So there you go. Welcome, Wallace Klinck.
Hi, Arnie. How are you? We're having a much, I think, softer winter right now in the west, and Bob is having down east,
Hmm.
and it's really quite moderate. There's hardly any snow left, and I think most of it is melted, and I think it's quite pleasant actually. Not, for the time of the year,
Yeah,
we're entering now, going on towards spring.
yeah, yeah. That's right. No worries. Well, we're mid-20s. Overnight it's about 12, 13 degrees. So you snuggle up a bit. We dress up. I've even put a hat on at night to just sit there. Saves the heater. Otherwise, I'd have to put the heater on. And so we're just on the shoulder of summer. This is incredible that we've gone through. So it's certainly not warming. It's cooling. All right, let's go through the papers and just have a quick look around. So the Australian talks about the European Union blocking vaccines and a bit of noise about that. We've got a few issues in Australia with our politicians, unsavoury situations that the media's playing up, playing down. It's all no good. Um, yeah, nothing really untoward in a sense. I think there's a bit of concern about Wall Street, inflation, banking, things like that. And of course, in Australia, the payment support finishes at the end of this month, end of March, and that means that the subsidy that businesses were given due to the lockstep lockdown will be finished. And so at that time, there could be a huge amount of people going to the unemployment queues, a huge amount. The financial review, again the same. There was a bit of talk about an earthquake near New Zealand, but so far I haven't heard any more. But again, I guess this business about finance and what it means. I've got one of my sons is involved in purchasing property, and the subsidies. There were new home payments. There were new home payments directed, and that seems to be melting as well. So that means, in my view, that will the building industry will actually have some repercussions coming up in the month ahead. Um, Joe Biden and his package, not really that much going on in the world. It seems to be a lull, really, in news reporting. There's not a lot of major headlines. It's more or less just continuing on with what is going on, the existing narrative, and just holding it together. And really, in my view, most of the news services are just putting in filler pieces. And that concerns me because I did see the other day, and I don't have it in front of me, it was on Macola website. It was about their government, India, the government in India, slipping through control of the food supply for the whole nation, slipping in a bill where it's actually handing over to the to international bodies, international corporate bodies, control of the control and distribution of the entire food for India. And of course, there was millions were on the street and demonstrating, and that you heard nothing. You heard nothing about it. If McCullough hadn't have brought it up, and if the Indian paper, it really wasn't a paper, it was more like a bulletin, like a news bulletin board that people just put articles up. And if that hadn't been brought up, I would not know that 250 million people, 250 million people, 20% of the population in India, were protesting about what the government had done during the lockdown without without actually working it through the people. And this brings us to the topic for today, really, and that is the will of the people. The will of the people, or the dominance of government over the people. Now, I know that during the time of Henry VIII, we saw that. King John, again with Magna Carta, we saw that. We saw in last century, we saw with the dictators of Europe, we saw that where they were just arbitrarily making decisions. And of course, this same type of dictatorship is emerging within the free nations in Australia, certainly Canada, Britain the same with the lockstep lockdown, and of course the fact that the American capital is still the Capitol, the building itself, is still behind barbed wire, and the National Guard is still deployed in Washington. In other words, it's a coup in America. The administration, who's calling themselves in power at the moment, knows that it's a coup. They know that the election was a fraud, and of course the will of the people has been entirely circumvented. Now, this brings us really to the heart of our discussion today. What are the tools that are available to us? What are our options? What can we actually consider to put back in place or to restore in order for the will of the people? The actual, what do the people want? What do they honestly want? Do they want freedom, or do they want dictatorship? Do they want freedom of choice to move about? Do they want freedom of choice in a medical situation to choose what they do and don't do? Or do they want a dictator to actually make all of these decisions for them? Your thoughts? I'm keenly interested to start you off, Robert Klinck.
Well, a lot of them do want a dictator, I fear, because they're living under a regime of terror. They've been told that their life is threatened by this virus. And in fact, this is psychology, applied psychology. The British government has been quite frank in saying that there's a need to instill more fear in the population in order to get them to cooperate with the measures being imposed. And you can be quite certain that that is the policy in other countries as well. The overriding concern of the establishment is to perpetuate the anti-COVID controls, because these are very beneficial to those who want to weaken the population and to control it. They've got people not talking to each other. They've got people wearing masks and looking ridiculous, and they're constantly upping the ante and saying, you don't need one mask, you need 2 masks. Some people say you need 3 masks, plus a pair of pantyhose to make sure that the masks are held tightly against your face and that no air is escaping. I don't know where your breath is supposed to go, but these people don't seem to be concerned about that. But in effect, they have used applied psychology, and I think that it can be broken down into 3 elements. One is this fear I've spoken of, and you can see that they have actually terrorized many people. There are many people who have just retired into their houses and not come out. They order their groceries in and they sit in their homes for months on end. I know of a number of instances of this. It's quite dreadful to think how terrorized they must have been by the propaganda about this virus. So there's the fear thing, but they always use also guilt. And the guilt aspect is to convince you that if you don't go along with the program, then you are endangering your fellow citizens. So you better wear a mask, you better keep a distance away from them, or you are not a decent person because you're jeopardizing other people's health. And in Canada, I can tell you that we have a prime minister who just loves guilt trips. He's apologized to everybody in sight. People who didn't come near the country. He just made a career of apologizing, trying to plant in the minds of the Canadian population that they've been guilty of many, many nasty things in the past. We have a black history, I guess. Anyway, that's Justin Trudeau. And the third aspect of the psychology that's being applied is to exploit people's really fundamental goodwill. They get them involved in the sense that they are participating in a great cause, and therefore they subordinate their judgment, their individual judgment, and they subordinate their individual will in order to go along with this communal effort to wrestle this virus to the ground. So they've got people with various attributes and attitudes all collaborating in this COVID thing. And until we can liberate the different character types who are assisting this program from the instilled attitudes that are causing them to go along with it so willingly, I really am afraid that we're in a bad position. It's going to be necessary to convince people that what's been going on has not been justified, it's not been warranted, and it has actually done so much harm that the people who are responsible for it should be held accountable in a very serious way. And a lot of people are talking about trials. I think that's not an unreasonable suggestion at this stage. But before we get to that, we're going to have to get a lot more people not cooperating with the program.
Thank you for that, Robert. That's an interesting proposal that you're laying down, but I believe it's warranted too, that we actually should hold the bureaucrats who've made these calls to shut down the whole bureaucrats and politicians, to shut down the whole nation, and especially the businesses that are deliberately actually compromised. Their cash flows are compromised, all that sort of stuff. These are quite profound things if you're actually trying to run a business and your cash flow. I went to the shopping centre, the regional shopping centre the other day, and honestly, 50% of the shops were closed, were boarded up, and that's to me is a reflection of what is really happening in the community. Your thoughts, please, Wallace Klinck.
Well, it is. Let's be candid about it. It's sabotage. It is an exercise in a psychopolitical exercise, which is being used to control people's attitudes, their beliefs, their fears, to direct their behavior, and it is all directed toward the centralization of power.
It is,
and it is, and power should reside with the individual, provided the individual does not directly attempt to impair the independence of his neighbor. And if anybody thinks that they're going to solve their problems by centralizing power more and more in the hands of the state, or in the hands of the state and the big corporations, I'm afraid they're in for a very rude awakening. That has never worked. It's simply, these people simply become intoxicated with their power, and they become more and more inclined to interfere in the lives of the people and to ruin the lives of the people because of their interference. There's no way that a small group of people can anticipate the wishes, desires, and rights of the population at large. That is something that inheres in what we call natural law. These people, detest natural law, because natural law implies that there is a power that resides at a higher level than they do, and that's why they are opposed to any concept of universal principles or anything that inheres within the universe itself as a guiding force. So we're dealing with people who are megalomaniacs. They think that they supersede the natural world and the regulatory principles that are inherent within that creation, and it's just an incredible exercise of arrogance, and it can only lead to disaster until the people themselves are given a genuine opportunity to choose their own course in life and to determine their own destiny in a natural way.
Thank you
So
for that.
it's
Sorry.
yeah, it's just a really a crime of the highest order what is being done, because these people, for some reason or another, people like Barnaby Joyce in Australia, who were the head of your national airline.
Party, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, where does he ever get the astounding, colossally arrogant notion that he can tell people that unless they go along with the desires and wills and policies of him and his friends, that they will no longer fly. Not only that, they will no longer bank. I mean, I can't believe that people can be this arrogant. But you know, people who get accustomed to having their own way without any kind of restraint or challenge can become unbelievably arrogant. Yeah. And of course, dangerous.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Wally. I think of, I mentioned earlier on, King John, to the point where he wanted to impose his will over the whole nation. And of course, last century we had our dictators, and how ruthless they were. And yet here we are, in a state of fear, and we're allowing our own politicians to become that same calibre of dictator, to impose laws to lock us down, to stop our travel, to close borders, stop our gainful employment, threaten us with banking, to stop us from getting access to our own funds. I mean, this is blackmail, and this is coming from people who are not actually held accountable. And in my view, this comes back to, okay, what have we done historically? What are some of the things that we have done historically in order to pull politicians into line? Now, I note at the moment that Switzerland is going to hold a referenda on the lockstep lockdown. I think it's about June. They've collected sufficient signatures, and so they're going to hold a referenda on it. They object to it. I note that California wants to hold a referenda on the performance of their governor, and again the same. They will hold that person to account. And I know that there are other states where they are defying, in America, they're defying the edicts of Joe Biden when he says you will, you shall, you must, and governors are saying no, we won't. We're going to keep the economy going. We're going to let our people continue on enjoying the fruits of their labours and the fresh, clean air that's out there, and talking to their neighbour, and all the communications that needs to go on. And on the basis of that, you've got to consider that historically, we've got to look at this and think, well, okay, what are our mechanisms? What are our mechanisms? And in my view, the first is that the Constitution is there. Is it being upheld? Is it actually being adhered to? Are you being effectively represented by your politician? Are you? Is that what is actually happening? And if it's not happening, then what are you doing about it? Because if you don't do anything about it, then of course these dictators will just continue on. The last century, you had revolutions and it was instant, but it was also a game of bluff. It was a game of bluff when the coups happened and the revolutionaries took over. It was a game of bluff. Can they hold their ground? And generally, it was external military support that allowed them to do it. And it's no different today. What is actually going on with the in America? The barbed wire is around the Capitol building, the barbed wire, and the National Guard is out because they are terrified that the people will actually object to this coup. And that to me is the key to it. This is the thinking that you've got to consider, that what is actually transpiring isn't an accurate reflection of the will of the people. So the will of the people have to consider, how do you find expression in your will? And that to me is something that we need to consider in today's forum. Robert Klinck, your thoughts, please.
Well, I've just been reading a bit of Russian history, and Catherine the Great apparently came to the conclusion that in order for the Tsar to remain in power, they had to recognize that the gendarmerie had control over the ultimate power in the country. So they were always cultivating good relations with the palace guard, because the palace guard, I was quite astonished to read this, had actually murdered, I think, at least 3 Tsars. They didn't want them, and they just strangled them to death. So the Tsars got very worried about the presence of these military people. And it reminds me a bit of what's going on in Washington. Are they going to get away with giving orders to the soldiers who were there and having absolute compliance from these soldiers? Because if they don't, it could turn very nasty for those people. One hopes that soldiers will not comply. One hopes that soldiers will do their duty, but when their duty is to undermine the Constitution and to uphold a coup, which seems to be the case in the United States right now, certainly looks that way, then we hope that the soldiers will see a higher duty and just not cooperate with that, or perhaps actually put a stop to it. You don't like to see things get to that point. It's a terrible thing to contemplate, but sometimes that kind of action is necessary. Wally was talking about the arrogance of the people who are trying to take control of the world now, and it's true. These people actually have a God complex. You know, if someone came up to you and said, "I am God," I don't think you'd take them very seriously. But these people, in effect, are saying that all the time. They are just not normal. So when they're telling you what you have to do and how the world is going to appear in future and how we have to reset everything, you have to recognize the absolute arrogance and assumption of power over all of society, all of nature. It's such an incredible claim they're making, but they're making it, no doubt. And it's certainly strange that they're coming up with arguments that we have to go to a more egalitarian society. All you have to do is look at the people who are putting this forth, and they're all billionaires. They have no interest in egalitarianism. All they want to do is thrust the mass of the population down to a position of total dependence, which they will do through the abolition of opportunities for people to obtain income through initiative that gives them a measure of independence. Now although many people don't seem to realize this, we're all dependent on the financial system. And no matter how well you succeed in attaining some independence, financial independence through your initiative, the financial system can step in and destroy you at any time it wants to. So the key to actually dealing with this system in a definitive way is taking away the power of the financial system to arbitrarily crush whomever it doesn't like. Regarding that Russian situation, I was interested to read that the Tsar, this was Nicholas I in the early part of the 19th century, he was a real martinet. He was a stern military guy, very actually, there was a revolt against him, and the result of that was that they were planning to execute a large number of people. Now, the people in the army were largely nobles, and a number of these people were prosecuted for being in the revolt, and the expectation was that they would be executed, and a few were, not many. But the Tsar said, I'm not going to execute them. I'm going to imprison them. Now, these were people who came from spoiled backgrounds. They didn't support prison very well, and they were all turned and became agents of the state, working for the Tsarist regime in order to inform on other people who might have independent thinking. And in effect, they established something not very unlike communism and Nazism in terms of the infiltration of society by state agents. And we're seeing an effort to do this in our society too, with this encouragement of snitching and informing on people who are not complying with all the COVID rules. So we're on a very precarious course here. And unless people become conscious of where they're heading, we need to, we have to make them aware of that. That's a challenge for us. I think a lot are at least becoming resistant to the continuation of this program of controls because they were lied to. They were told it would be for 2 weeks, and then they had to extend it, and then they intensified it, and then they relaxed it. And now, if you listen to what the health authorities are saying, they're saying this is going to go on for at least another year or two. And of course, there's no guarantee it's going to end then. So this is a perpetual state they're trying to impose on us, and it is a state of oppression and in effect, slavery.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Robert. That's an excellent summary. I'd be keenly interested in your thoughts in regard to methods of actually resisting, and also, of course, that I was interested in what you said about the fact of individuals snitching, individuals reporting, individuals off their own back. They've assumed that they are the new police, and they're going to enforce a new, if you like, decree through intimidation or through whatever. We've got them in Australia. You've got marshals everywhere, hand marshals you have to wash, and mask marshals, and then sign-in marshals and all this sort of stuff. And I know the government is imposing this on the retailers, imposing them on the shop owners, that you can't open unless you've got social distancing, unless you've got a marshal, unless you've got a sign-in point and all this sort of stuff. You can't actually allow the public back in, but it's not mandatory. You may have to do it as a shop owner in order to continue to trade, but people do not have to comply. That is not mandatory. And to me, the very point is, if it's not mandatory, then definitely don't do it. And if it becomes mandatory, then it's time that you consider how can you start replacing your politicians with people who are a little bit more realistic about representing the will of the people. Your thoughts, please, Wally Klinck.
Oh, well, I have, I take every opportunity I can to broach the subject with people that I think might be amenable to the message. And I've talked to a lot of people, and they will say, there's nothing we can do about it. Which they're making an admission that they know things are not right. And all you have to do is progress from a knowledge of things that aren't right to a knowledge of how one might rectify the situation. And that, of course, is what the establishment is so afraid of, because they're afraid that people might get together on in their resistance to this sort of thing. And then their scheme is doomed to failure. And that's why they have been using such draconian means to terrorize, to intimidate people with fines which are quite beyond the ability of the average person to pay. Certainly to pay without grave, great consequences. So it's a reign of terror that they want to set up. We do have a bit of a tradition of freedom in this part of the world, and they have to be a little bit careful about how extreme they get and how rapidly they push it. But they're trying. I think the attitude is that they can snowball it, just snowball it and run over society in a hurry before society actually has an opportunity to understand what is really going on and take steps to reverse it. So I think that you'll notice in the United States now that Texas has passed legislation more or less throwing these lockdown regulations out. I think it was Mississippi, I think, or Tennessee, similarly.
Yeah.
And, South Dakota never apparently did have much in the way of regulations of this sort. And they apparently have, to my knowledge, have no unusual occurrence or excess of this alleged virus. And in that regard, a fellow from California, he claims to be a scientist, and he has put in a request to the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, asking them for an example of this virus. In other words, has it been isolated? Does it exist? And they surprisingly came back to him with the statement, as it's reported, that they don't have any samples. So he said it's been established that the virus itself does not exist in any unique way at all, beyond being, a cold. And so it appears that he said they're taking it to court. They're definitely making a legal issue out of it. Now, as Bob says, don't mind my saying, I mean, he frequently reminds me that the courts aren't so ethical either these days. The courts have been badly infiltrated and corrupted. And so you can't count on really unbiased justice through the court system. You might be lucky enough to get it once in a while, but you can't really depend on it. And so anyway, I think that there is a resistance that is developing. I don't think there's any doubt about it. And I know that Irish girl who has been campaigning quite persistently has pretty well said the same thing, that they have admitted that the virus doesn't even exist. So it seems to be a specter, a psychological specter that has been raised up above society and in a way to terrorize it on a basis that is really detached from reality. But you see, of course, I guess you can say that the way people can be affected and terrorized and made afraid, I guess it's part of reality, but it's a perverse aspect of it because it's a use of psychology, propaganda, and so on in order to obtain results and behavior from people that is not something they would normally engage in at all. They need some kind of an artificial stimulus in order to be driven to accept a lot of these claims and to accept the demands of the establishment with regard to their behavior. So it's, I think that I'm hoping that somewhere within the human mind, the human psyche, there is sufficient attachment left to reality that it will emerge and prevail. But it seems like people have to be driven to, have to be subject to very, very extreme conditions before they wake up and decide that something has to be done to rectify the situation.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that, Wally. I'm just going to touch across to the article in Gateway Pundit. The Governor Abbott announces all businesses can reopen 100%. So that's important to take that into account, that there is actually areas of resistance to what is going on, but they're not 50 states in America, and perhaps 2 or 3 are doing something constructive against the tyranny, but the rest are just compliant. And that's really the question that comes to my mind now, is that at what stage does it actually cause an individual to do something, to decide? Now, we've got people in South Australia who've committed to demonstrating every week. They're going to demonstrate every week, similar to what the Yellow Vests are doing in France. But the Yellow Vests, let's be realistic about it, October, I think it was, November 2018, they've been at it for more than 2 years. And they are not changing what is going on in France. They're not changing it. So the demonstration, weekly demonstration, while you're committed to it, but is it the most intelligent use of resources? Because I sort of figure it, Adelaide, for me, I'd have to allow an hour to get in there, an hour to get home. The demonstration, even if it only lasts for another hour, that's at least 3 or 4 hours out of the day, plus the organising and everything else that goes with it, if you've got home duties that you've got to take into account. So you're giving up half a day. Now, if you thought about that, what can I actually do with half a day of my time? What could I actually do that might actually have more bang for my buck? And that to me is an interesting concept to actually consider. And you say, well, what could you actually do? Well, I know that the local, I've seen it done before, the local market, the local farmers market. If you happen to know someone who goes there, and I do, I know someone who goes there to sell honey. Now, if you know that they go there to sell honey, can you actually just sit on their shoulder and do something like take a census of the people who come to buy honey, or even everyone who goes past? Take a census and say, what are the most pressing issues that you've got? And you find out what those most pressing issues are. Honestly, is it the lockdown? Is it border closure? Is it mandatory vaccines? Is it the fact that your business is lunching and there's no ramifications for the politicians or for the bureaucrats who are making these decisions to actually lunch your business? There's a lot of questions that needs to be asked, and on the basis, honestly, of just asking those questions, you then analyse what can you actually do about it. And this is where it comes down to initiative on your own part. What can you actually do about it? Well, the next time you go to the market, you've thought of these things through, the most pressing issues, and one happens to be, well, I think that the state borders should not be a physical border. I don't believe that the police should stop people from travelling from state to state. I think freedom of movement is very important, and all these tracing apps and all that sort of stuff that's going on, but just talking about the borders as one single issue. Or it may be another issue like mandatory vaccines. They're going to stress that you actually take a vaccine, and if it's a condition of employment, what are you supposed to do then? It's mandatory. And if the vaccine damages you, who is responsible? There was a politician in New South Wales brought in legislation to say that if you're compelled to have a vaccine, the local business is responsible if you're injured by it. And I'm thinking, hang on a sec, where does Bill Gates and Anthony Fauci come into this? They came up with this whole concept, and they've got, what have they got? Scott Morrison gave them immunity from liability. I mean, let's be realistic. The small business is going to get sued because you get injured, but Bill Gates and Fauci are going to take their billions home. What sort of accountability is that? Totally irresponsible on the part of the Prime Minister to do that. Totally irresponsible and unaccountable on the part of these business people to exploit the situation for their own benefit. I mean, this is crazy, but the local business, they can go broke. So on the basis that you're actually going into the community, you're at the market and you're taking these sort of census, and then you ask a question, well, what is your will? What is your will? The Parliament is supposed to represent, the representatives are supposed to represent the will of the people. What is your will? What can you do about your will? Well, the first thing you can do is, on the basis of where you are with the people and you're taking a poll, is assist them in writing out a document that says to this, my local representative, this is my will. And I insist that you actually represent that in the Parliament. This is my will. This is not for negotiation. This is my will. And it's on the basis of that, the representatives should do the right thing and represent the will. But of course they won't. And they haven't for the last 160 years because of party politics. Because the parties have actually undone the power of Parliament. So it's up to the individual to regain the initiative. And in my view, something like that at the local market, polling, assisting people to write their will letters, and then making sure that those letters get to their representative. I think you can assist them, but what you're doing is you're educating. You're educating people that they can do something. They can do something, not nothing. Your thoughts, please, Robert Klinck.
That's a very interesting proposal, Arnie, in part because there's really no way that you could be fined or punished for innocently asking people what they think about various conditions that they're enduring. So I think that's a pretty safe way of not getting yourself involved with the supposed legal aspects of this. I'm not sure they are legal. We don't know what suggestions are and what regulations are and what laws are in the context of these things. There's so much confusion about what people actually are being legally required to do. In fact, quite a few people who've been issued fines in some jurisdictions have gone into court and resisted and learned that the authorities didn't have the right to issue those fines. Now, I'm not going to say that you should make yourself liable for getting a fine in order to go into court to challenge it, but there's just a lot of confusion about these things. It's a very, very unfair situation. And, the law is supposed to be clear. It isn't clear in these circumstances. It's deliberately fuzzy and confused to disarm people and to make people feel insecure about what they're able to do to resist. Now, you mentioned the situation in the United States. The United States states have a very strong conviction that they have a lot of autonomy. It's a federation down there. It's not a confederation. In Canada, the provinces are recognized as being much more subordinate to the central government than the states in the United States. But the problem is that through the years, the central government has acquired immense power largely through its taxation capacity. It has become an organ of financing of so many activities that the states are carrying out and trespassed on many areas that traditionally were reserved to the states. This is true in Canada too. The federal government has just taken the lion's share of income in the form of taxation, and that gives it clout over all the provinces. And in some regards, this has resulted in direct violation of the provisions of our founding constitution. This seems to be the tendency everywhere. And also, we have these bureaucracies being set up. We get suffocated by bureaucracies. This is not a natural development. This is a deliberate policy that has been followed under the influence of Fabian socialist thinking. And it is to, again, siphon power away from the individual and make him subordinate to all kinds of regulation and controls on the part of bureaucrats, often bureaucrats who aren't even identified. So as far as fighting the controls that have been imposed are concerned, there's a doctor in Britain who has made an argument, technical arguments against the lockdowns. Another person made the suggestion that we should be calling them lockups, not lockdowns. Sounds a little bit more severe, and in some cases they are actually lockups when they're tightening up. But this doctor has regularly printed 2,000 copies of his arguments and sent them out, hoping that people would distribute them door to door in the communities. I'm sure this would be a very effective measure, although the problem for most people is that they don't have the technical knowledge or authority to make arguments. They wouldn't have confidence in their own arguments on technical grounds. But this doctor says, just copy my paper. There's no copyright on it. I encourage everybody in the world to make use of it and distribute it around the community. This is certainly a worthwhile project, and it circumvents the tightening controls over the internet. There's something that people can retain. It's in printed form on paper, and also it means that it would probably be passed from the original recipient to other recipients and spread through the community. There is in Canada a really growing resistance within the church community, and most clergy have been pretty useless in fighting the imposition of this suppression of freedom. You know, as Christians, we're supposed to be primarily concerned with personal freedom. We're not setting a very good example in many respects of this, but there are many churches that have decided to fight. There are pastors in Canada who've gone to prison. There are pastors, one, I think he's been fined $11 million. I don't know how this could be taken seriously. How could you justify a fine like that for somebody who just wants to talk to his parishioners? But that's what they're doing, and they're even taking it to court. There's a case in BC. The trouble is, of course, that the courts are just not, you can't count on them to render justice anymore, because they have been politicized and become ideological, and they're just not concerned with the objective, impartial application of the law. So if you go into court, you never know what you're getting involved with now. I think there are still some judges, but there's no guarantee who are trying their best to fulfill the proper role of a judge, but fewer and fewer, and you can never count on ending up before one of these. I went to a demonstration. I don't like demonstrations because I find that you get involved with all kinds of people who don't really think the way you do. But I took a poster, a placard to a demonstration, and my placard said, "Fire the commissioner of the RCMP, the Federal Police Force, because he is not preventing the health authorities from publishing patently false information." Every day we hear this new case numbers, and it's obvious. There's no way that they can know the new case numbers for a jurisdiction or the nation without testing everybody the previous day, or having some kind of sampling system that is very scientifically set up so they could project numbers of new cases. But that's not what they're saying. They're saying, we have tested and we have new cases. Well, that means nothing. It obviously depends on how intensively they're testing. So these numbers are clearly fraudulent and they're intended to mislead. So I was saying that the commissioner of the RCMP is not doing her job by prosecuting the people who are putting this information out. Nor is the attorney general of the country doing his or her job. I'm not sure if it's a man or a woman right now, in seeing that this is prosecuted. The allegation is that we are in a serious health crisis, a big health emergency. But the publication of these figures, as far as I'm concerned, is equivalent to yelling fire in a theater. It's a totally false and inflammatory and representation of what's going on that is designed to make people fearful and therefore has an ulterior purpose that can't be justified on any scientific or rational grounds. So I think that you can make that kind of argument, and I do, in fact, talk to people when I'm in a line up at a store or something. I say, you know, these numbers that they're publishing are indefensible. They're ludicrous, because there's no way the government can possibly know the number of new cases. They can say the number of deaths, and that's probably exaggerated, but at least some people probably have died, and they can say how many people are in intensive care units, but there's no way that they can defend their publication of statistics on new cases. It's so ridiculous that they even claim that they can identify where somebody has been infected. This is another ridiculous thing, because all sorts of ways in which somebody could be infected. Recently, they've said that I think it's a South African variety, has been tracked down to a possibility of rising from 269 houses in southern England. Well, it's just ridiculous that they're making a claim that they can be tracing the infection in a detailed manner like that. So they're talking utter rubbish, and they should be held to account for it. And if they are talking rubbish in the context of what they allege is a serious health crisis, then this should be regarded as public mischief of the most serious kind.
Yeah, thank you for that, Robert. I'm going to cut across to an on target that was done just the other week, volume 57, number 6, and I talk here about the how the Irish were psychologically manipulated, and it's a very interesting talk. I'll give you the actual URL and reference to it, so you can go and listen to the talk, or there it is there on BitChute. You can go and listen to it. You can go and actually read the transcript, and in the regard to what's actually transpiring, I mentioned before that there was actually a void of news items. They were just filling us in on different things, and nothing blasting away. No great sort of news flash across the broadcasting services, and this is part of that psychological manipulation. It's called. I think it's like when the wife beater doesn't beat the wife, or the wife beater abandons the wife, and the wife, of course, who's always been beaten up by the abusive husband or abusive partner, whatever. They feel stranded. They feel left. They feel, hang on, they're disorientated because they're used to such a certain type of psychological application going towards them, and it's changed. And that's what's actually happening now. We're being abandoned by the media on indifferent issues of no consequence, and then they'll come back harder. And that's exactly what happened in Victoria. They had the Australian Open tennis, 30,000 people, arm to arm, everyone's doing everything, not an issue. And they were abandoned. What happened with all the COVID restrictions? And then they came back even harder. An instant snap lockdown. Your thoughts, please, Wallace Klinck, and considering closing comments.
Well, Arnie, I think, we are creations of the natural world, and we have our characteristics inbuilt, and one of those is conscience. Conscience, and also not just conscience, but the ability to feel for other conscious beings of our own kind and others. But the thing of it is, if we follow our conscience, we're probably following the best law that is available to us. And in our laws in the West, I think that we have made an attempt to recognize natural law as being superior to anything that man can really devise, because we're not the authors of our own being. We are what we are, and we didn't create ourselves. So we must come from another source which has its characteristic features, qualities. Now, if you genuinely have conscience, that probably is one of the closest connections you can make to whatever it is that constitutes the nature of the universe. And I think that that is probably the best law that we have, if it is really possessed and really practiced, and really practiced with regard to other people. In other words, the state is an artificial construct, and we make a great error in giving it too much weight. This was kind of reminiscent of remember the social credit premier of Alberta in the early days, William Aberhart. He said, if people haven't suffered enough already, it's their God-given privilege to suffer some more. And and then of course he published or made an address that was highly critical of the forces that he recognized as being an obstacle to the natural order. And well, he didn't live very much longer after doing that. We noticed, for instance, that doctor in Alberta with a business station in Texas, claims that he and his family have now been threatened. And threatened, as I understand, with death. So they've had to make special arrangements, apparently, to protect themselves as they can. I think that, a law is subject to interpretation, not natural law, but human law is subject to interpretation, and it is bound to be inadequate in some ways. I think if you follow your conscience, and your conscience is really involves a genuine empathy for your fellow beings, that is an inbuilt law, and an inbuilt law that is actually in tune with the universe. It's something that is real, whereas human law is subject to interpretation, to pressure, to all sorts of influences which are not necessarily in harmony with natural law. So we have tried to give deference to natural law, which means that we should be free to do, well, our position is that the individual is free to do anything he wants, unless it is determined that it's harmful to someone else. And the state really can't do anything except what it is specifically allowed to do. And that is a recognition that there's got to be some kind of a law or an influence that is above human beings. And that is the only source that can be relied upon as being realistic. So, but of course, those who are of the tyrannical turn of mind do not like the idea of any kind of natural recognition of natural law, because that puts them in the difficult position of being dethroned from their their pretensions to have justification for the laws that they propose, which are usually to favor some group of people or some particular interest.
Mm.
So it's, I think that we have within us the basis for living the good life. But we have been taken over by forces, influences that are not concerned with anything primarily except what they perceive to be in their own interest, or in the interest of their friends, or in the interest of their masters. So I really don't think we should have too much government. We have certain functional things that we have to look after, and we have to come to a common acceptance or understanding with some of these things. But it's wrong, very wrong, tremendously wrong for the state to take to take a major influence in our lives. That should be left to us as individuals, provided we don't, determine to harm someone else in the process. So I think that we are the materialistic interpretation of life that denies the existence of anything beyond the visible, the touchable, the tangible, is a tremendous error on our part, and opens us, makes us subject to the influence of very undesirable forces. So I think we should give recognition to the soundness of our attempt to recognize natural law in the affairs of man, and to really discredit the idea that certain amongst us have the right to simply declare that they are the supreme power over humanity.
Yeah.
So that's why any form of statism, communism, fascism, anything that attempts to seize control over the affairs of men, while at the same time restricting individuals unjustly, is a blueprint for disaster.
Thank you for that, Wally. That's particularly well put. I'm reminded of the scripture that man does not live by bread alone.
Mm-hmm.
He does not live by bread alone. And I think there's a second part to it, and of course that's the word of God comes into it, every breath. But the bread alone, in other words, we're not just a carnal beast. We're not a cow or a sheep or whatever. There are other things in our considerations, in our discussions on this show. We're actually challenging our thinking, our spiritual anchor, where we're looking for truth. We're looking for the right way, if you like, that the canon is the word, where something is just right. And what we're seeing at the moment is that something is not right at all. Your thoughts and closing comments, please, Robert Klinck.
Well, I like that mention of the canon, Arnie. That's when you undertake any activity and you have a clear goal, at some point you will get a sense that you've arrived, that everything has come together in the right way. And this is when you have satisfied the canon. Now, that concept is very interesting because it's sort of inherent in you that you recognize it when it's there. And you wonder why we have a susceptibility to emotional influence from music. You wonder why we have this inherent recognition of when we're doing things in just the right way. This is part of our spiritual being. These are mysteries, and they are phenomena that should humble us. We should have humility, and from humility we can accomplish great things. The trouble with the people who are trying to take over the world is that humility is completely alien to them. They have no humility. They don't recognize that they have limitations on their understanding of how things might work, and that they might be making grave misinterpretations. You know, we go through life and we make these discoveries, but these people think they've got everything figured out, and they can just come along and impose it on the rest of mankind. It's a dreadful thing, and it's come with the decline of Christianity. Now, I'm not going to make a big boast for Christianity, because its weaknesses have been rather scandalously revealed on many occasions, and many Christians think that they can set themselves up as judges over everybody else's behavior. So, but these people don't have the spirit of Christianity, I'm afraid. Christ didn't come to judge the world, he said. Did he? No, he didn't come to judge the world.
No.
He came to free the world and to reveal to us how we can enjoy true freedom by loving our fellows. And that is, and by serving. If you are serving rather than dominating, you find that life suddenly becomes a marvel and is amazingly rich. This is a discovery that one hopes more and more people will make. And all this narcissistic ambition to run everything because somehow you are possessed of the knowledge of the fundamental rules of the universe will be discarded. And we're living in a narcissistic age, and it's a very sad thing. There's perhaps an excess of the spirit of obedience and that sort of thing, but humility will never do you wrong, because we're faced with such an immense universe to explore, and with so many complexities that they just awe one to contemplate them. I mean, humility is the key to penetrating all these mysteries. And surely that's what life is all about. It's unraveling these mysteries largely for yourself. You will find in your personal life that there are lots of mysteries to unravel, as well as maybe larger scientific ones that you're not equipped to deal with. But it's this sense of discovery and anticipation of surprises in life that really makes life worth living. And I'm sure that these people who seize power, in fact, I saw this when I was reading about the Tsars. Many of the people who were in line to become Tsars were absolutely terrified at the prospect. And they even said they didn't want to become the Tsar. Well, they were largely convinced Christians. Now, when they became Tsars, they often didn't follow Christian principles very well, but they just didn't want to get involved with this dreadful power structure that would take over their lives. And the people who are trying to take over the world now are going to find the same thing in the end. They'll be disappointed by their success, because, in fact, the greatest success in life is in service, and it operates on a personal scale.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that, Robert. That personal scale, I've found the greatest joy is actually, with my children, my family, my extended family, is being able to help them. And of course, the most satisfaction in my own life is yes, nutting out a problem. I have no issue with that, just simple things. Whereas making decisions that affect whole peoples, whole cities, whole nations, making decisions, and then you honestly look at the ramifications, the potential ramifications. This lockstep, lock up, lock down. The people that are destitute and who are in isolation, who are just so frustrated, disillusioned by what's going on that they choose to suicide rather than continue to live. I mean, these are the real outcomes, the real result, and that's why the individual who's not held accountable for those decisions is so wrong. And this is where we're coming from. That's what Parliament, that's what the Constitution is all about. It's about holding the bureaucrat, holding the politician to account. So by willingly going along with this whole charade, by willingly relinquishing power to these people, you're actually helping them do evil. And you can't do that. You've actually got a responsibility to be responsible for yourself. You've got a responsibility. You have to be responsible for yourself. And if that's not the heart of the Christian gospel, I don't know what is. Thank you so much, Robert and Wally Klinck, for today. It's been a beaut forum.
Thank you, Arnie.
Thanks, Arnie. Very nice to be with you. We had a little bit of an ordeal getting organized, but we did it.
We did. We were 2 hours late, but we got it. Thank you so much, and thank you for your support. Cheers, ladies and gentlemen.